Wondering if your business can pay for its expenses in cash? Well, watch on. As a business accountant, my team and I spend all day long helping business owners on their journey, and one common question that pops up a lot, and in actual fact ended up in the comments a couple of times in a few of the videos, is can I pay for my expenses inside of my business, particularly with a limited company, using cash? And I think that's a great question, and there's a few myths around this that is probably slightly perpetrated by accountants and bookkeepers, and I'm going to touch on that as well in this video. But before I get into it, if you like these types of videos, make sure to click the subscribe button below so you get notified whenever we release more just like it. So the best place to start would probably be, why would you want to pay for some of the things in cash? Obviously these days, where we've got online banking, contactless cards, it's easy to just pay somebody online. But actually for a lot of businesses who are fairly cash based, now obviously the pandemic's changed this slightly in that obviously there's a lot more sort of focus on not having cash, but actually there's still a lot of cash based businesses. If you think of like a car wash, potentially like a barber's, these kind of places, there's a lot of cash changes hands. Now if you didn't know, if you have a business account, a true business account, most of the time when you go to put that cash into that business account, you're going to end up paying charges. And actually, it can get fairly significant over a year of the amount of money you'd end up paying to them. So a lot of these businesses, they've got this cash and it's a problem to them. So then they want to hand it off to somebody else and let them deal with the cash. So as a result, it's quite normal to want to use that cash to buy things for your business. And there's a lot of people then worry, well, can I actually do it? Now the myth that's out there and sort of circulates is, no, you absolutely cannot use cash. You can't draw £200 from the cash machine, for example, or you can't use some of this cash that's come in. Well, I'm going to tell you that's completely untrue. You can do what you want to a degree. It's all about records. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. So that is a myth. In terms of where it came from, I actually think it probably partly was down to bookkeepers and accountants, because I think as these types of people, we don't particularly like cash. They're a difficult thing to keep control of. And the reason is that for the majority of owners, quite often the records regarding cash are poor. And what happens when you go to balance those kind of accounts, those cash accounts inside of your bookkeeping, what can happen is it can cause queries and look odd. So for example, it's quite normal to do a piece of bookkeeping and then see that the cash is in a minus, which would be impossible. You can't have minus cash. There's no overdraft where cash is concerned. But that's normally because the owners actually stuck their hand in their pocket and paid out personal funds. And then of course it raises questions, and sometimes you're doing a big batch of these and it can be then hassle for the client or whatever. So for a lot of reasons, I think accountants and bookkeepers don't like cash. And the other reason is that the records tend to get lost. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute about receipts. But ultimately, sometimes you will pay for things and not get a receipt, or you might have lost the receipt. And therefore there's this question mark around and concern around, if Revenue and Customs looked at it, would you actually be able to claim that expense? So that I think that's where that myth probably came from. But ultimately, it is a myth. You can definitely pay for things with cash. And as I mentioned, in some cases, it's actually a good idea. And that's both with a limited company and if you're even not a limited company, if you're a sole trader or a partnership, that also applies. Now then, can you claim? So if we have lost the receipt, can you claim? That's the question. Or what if I don't get one? So for example, you deal in second-hand goods, you go to a car boot, not everybody's sitting there with a little receipt pad to write you out a receipt for £2.50 for something, or you're buying second-hand postcards or something like that. It can be difficult. Now, actually, you don't have to have a receipt. Now, before I get into that though, the disclaimer I'm going to give you is, of course, you should try and get a receipt. You 100% should, because Revenue and Customs, if you are unlucky enough to get investigated, will say to you, right, give me all your stuff, show me your backup evidence. And that's really what you're looking for in this case, is evidence to show that you've incurred that expenditure. And obviously if it's clear in the bank statement what it's going to be, let's say online subscriptions for certain stuff, then that's going to be fairly easy. But if you go using the car boot example, if you go around the car boot and pick up loads of small items because you're trading small second-hand goods, then actually it can be difficult to keep those records. But what you should do is, even if it's just a little book with date, I went to this car boot and you kept your ticket for your entry to the car boot, for example, or something like that, or some evidence that you were there, and a list of, these are the items I bought and how much and everything else. Obviously, you can ask the trader if you can have a receipt, if they can do anything, or if they could sign your book. Any evidence that you could get is ultimately what you're looking for. But the HM Revenue and Customs manuals themselves refer to this fact that if you have got small level items, that they're not necessarily going to want every receipt. In actual fact, if I remember, I will actually link some of the guidance down there. They do like a bookkeeping manual that suggests how you should keep your business records, and it's referenced in there. So it's not just a thing that's hearsay, it's actually written down in a manual somewhere. So bear that in mind. But yeah, best practice, of course, you should have a receipt. And in terms then of how you might keep those receipts, one of the best ways to do that is to use technology these days. If you've come across it, it used to be known as Receipt Bank, but there's a thing called Dext. That's DEXT. And there's an app for your phone, so you can snap your receipts and capture it there, and it will read the dates and names off of those receipts and help you with your bookkeeping, and it can transmit it straight from their kind of portal into your bookkeeping software, so that's quite cool. A lot of the main apps like QuickBooks and Xero have ways of snapping receipts and capturing them inside their system, and then you can kind of bookkeep it from there. So there's a ton of apps and technology you can use, and that's just naming a few. I mean, there's loads of them coming on the market every day that can help them, but what we find is little and often, and you should avoid it. The biggest issue, I think, a lot of the time is if you leave all your record keeping to the end of the year and you come down to look at it and suddenly you're missing all the receipts. And if you're dealing with an accountant, they're going to ask you questions, or ultimately you might have lost the tax deduction. So for example, if you imagine 6 months ago you did that car boot, you didn't get any receipts, you can't remember how much you spent, you can't be bothered, you've probably lost tax deduction there, and it's going to cost you money. So good record keeping is always, if you've heard me talk on this subject at all, is always the first thing I'll tell you is the best way to save tax. Keep good records, do it often, and do it in little amounts. That's it. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. If you know anybody who would benefit from this video, make sure to share it with them, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.